So our next presentation is by Gianna, Allman, and Josh Bates and Lauren Thompson from Dalhousie University. And the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you. So Josh and I are delighted to be here today. Our co-author, Lauren, she couldn't be here today with us, but she has been a senior TA in our lab and best partner for the past 5 years. So we're really excited to have her. 3 years ago, I began to integrate the teaching of soft skills into our lab program. And this is part of our ongoing effort to make students more aware of the professional behavioral skills most valued by employers. Now, we all know that while these skills make sense to some students, they're not clear to others. So the explicit teaching of soft skills in the early years plays an important role in preparing students for future success. So in this presentation, we will briefly describe how the introduction of soft skills active learning sessions in our lab came about, in particular, one related to peer feedback. Then we will talk about how this activity actually evolved to meet the challenges of remote learning. And finally, how we will use what we have learned to inform future teaching in the new normal, whatever that is, hopefully soon. So the courses that I teach at the second year level are introductory physical chemistry courses that are primarily populated by chemistry majors and honors. So this actually gives me a really good opportunity to introduce this type of skills training early on in their degree. So in the beginning, a major challenge was how to introduce this without actually compromising content. So I found that the most room to do this in the lab environment, which is a natural active learning setting with reduced class size and increased instruction time. So in fall 2019, I introduced 4 active learning sessions, and given the positive response from students, I wanted to ensure continuity into the winter semester. So we came up with a plan to implement 2 more active learning sessions into the winter term. Specifically, one of these involved experimental design, and another one was about providing feedback. So today's talk will focus on our active learning session related to peer feedback.
So students are most familiar with feedback from their instructors, typically some sort of grade, possibly some comments. Challenges with this traditional feedback model include timeliness and transferability. It isn't always clear how a given comment might apply to future work, and it doesn't benefit the current work after the fact. Also, do our comments prepare students to communicate to non-experts in the subject material? In considering peer feedback, when done well, this requires students really engage with the material, consider different perspectives, and offer constructive commentary, and hopefully incorporate new information into their own models of understanding. And very important to the online delivery, this really humanizes the experience. One of the experiments we have our students perform is a study on photocatalytic degradation of organic dyes. The intention of this experiment and the methods of assessment are to emphasize teamwork and communication skills. For the active learning session, students were asked to submit a draft of the report before this session so that I could anonymize the reports. The concern at the time being that students may be uncomfortable sharing their unfinished work with their peers and or not be willing to be critical of their peers' work in order to protect feelings. The session itself involved a presentation on providing feedback, and then students were provided the remainder of the 3-hour lab period to read, review, and then provide guided feedback. After the active learning session, I read through the feedback forms, summarized key common issues, and then sent out both the specific and general feedback to the students. Students were asked to submit a reflection questionnaire with their final report. So based on student feedback and our own observations, the sessions were productive, but there's definitely room for improvement. The single biggest issue was a lack of accountability, whether it was the fact that the draft report itself was not worth points, or due to the anonymity, some students put little to no effort into preparing their draft report. Unfortunately, this deprived those students of an opportunity to receive feedback, but more importantly, it deprived their peers of a meaningful opportunity to read, critically assess, and then articulate constructive feedback to their peers. Other concerns were that by limiting the review to the in-lab session, this meant there was only time for one reviewer and no opportunity for follow-up questions or comments. The feedback did not necessarily get implemented into their final drafts. And lastly, in order to expedite returning the feedback to students, the evaluation was largely a participation mark.
So for the second iteration of this feedback active learning session, we found ourselves in pandemic mode and facing the challenges of remote teaching and learning. So we really needed to rethink this activity, taking into consideration how to build on the 2020 in-person experience while coping with the challenges of online instruction for both students and the teaching team, some of which include, but are not limited to, adaptability, self-motivation, and technical problems. So with all those considerations in mind, we implemented several changes to promote community engagement. So given the impossibility of students to conduct the experiment, we had no choice but to move from experimental work followed by an individual report to an experimental design group project. We also made students accountable by getting them to draft and sign a group contract that outlined the expectations and responsibilities of each group member. We also added some flexibility to the timeline of the project. So we moved from 1 week to 6 weeks, and this created opportunity for 2 full rounds of peer feedback and made it easier for students to manage their time. Another thing that facilitated that management of time was the use of Microsoft Teams and the introduction of Microsoft Live documents for them to be able to work synchronously and asynchronously. So as part of the feedback training, students watched this short 2020 TED Talk video, highly recommended, by the way, by cognitive psychologist Leanne Reniger, where she shares a scientifically proven method for giving effective feedback using a 4-part formula that will help the reviewer pace the feedback, be specific, recognize that actions have impact, and actively ask for suggestions. So before we model our interpretation of this task, students were allowed to explore the concept of the 4-part formula by engaging in a role-play exercise to give and respond to feedback using a sample paper. For this, we used a live Microsoft Word document similar to what they would use for their own report. So after this, I brought them back together to model how I would approach a feedback. And I provided specific examples for each of the 4 elements of the formula that they needed to use. So this is a sample of the feedback generated by students. In any given group report, entries range anywhere between 150 and 200 comments, which is significantly more input than students were able to generate the year before. Also, using the track changes in Word made it really easy to follow the conversation, monitor the engagement and participation, and grade their feedback. When asked which of the soft skills introduced or practiced in the active learning sessions they consider the most important, 81% of the students responded that the most valuable skills were the feedback and the critical thinking involved in giving and responding to feedback. So for some students, this exercise was a true realization that feedback is indeed a transferable lifelong skill. Others recognize the impact of properly structuring the feedback, in particular the use of the 4-part formula, as a key element for producing detailed, constructive feedback and creating an effective line of communication, especially in the online environment.
So the current plan is that I'll be teaching the course again in winter 2022. That being said, it will not be the same course I taught in winter 2020. In particular, we were always intending to improve upon the 2020 course, as Gianna just described, but the shift to online allowed us to reimagine what is possible. Going forward, we intend to keep this experimental design exercise as a group project. We'll continue to take advantage of the technology that allows for a shared live document, and we'll continue to use an extended time frame to allow for multiple iterations of the feedback process. Providing and responding to feedback is not just for our students. Based on the suggestions of our colleague Lauren, one tweak we'll be making is having students rotate to reviewing other sections of the report for the second round of review. This has already been encouraged informally. Students were told they're ultimately responsible for being satisfied with the full report, but we want to formalize this process. Also, if we're in person, we will hopefully have the opportunity for students to actually test their experimental designs in person. Hopefully, by modeling and emphasizing the importance of these soft skills, we can begin to unblur these important concepts for our students. And so that just leaves us to thank the people who made this happen. A huge thank you to those folks you can see there, our TAs. We really could not have done it without them. All the students, our guinea pigs, and for their patience as we were trying these various things, certainly, and for their feedback was invaluable. The university and our department for various funding. The conference here for allowing us the opportunity to present, and all of you for your attention. Thank you very much.